children learn the rules of a house faster than the adults who live in it. Which chair is the one nobody sits in? Which cupboard has the good crackers? Which stair makes the noise? Which grown-up you can ask twice? They learn all of it in about 4 visits, and they never write any of it down. And if you ask them how they know, they shrug at you like you asked them how they know their own name. So when a 7-year-old stops you at a front door on a Saturday evening and tells you, very quietly, not to ring the bell, when she tells you that the two of you have to walk around to the back of the house, you should understand that you are not hearing a child being shy. You are hearing a rule. Somebody taught her that rule, deliberately, and she has been following it for a long time. And the reason your stomach just dropped is that you have been coming to this house for 6 years and nobody ever taught it to you. I'm Nathan. The man in this story spends his working life crawling through other people's basements with a thermal camera, finding the parts of a building that are lying about themselves. He is very good at it. And it took him 2 years and a 7-year-old's whisper to point that camera at the one house he'd been walking into, with a covered dish in his hands, every other Saturday since his wedding. What he found in that house is the reason I wanted to tell you this one. Because there was a room in it that was not on any plan, and there was a person in that room, and she had been there for 2.5 years, while 11 adults ate dinner 40 feet away. Wes Tolliver made his living finding the difference between what a building claims and what a building does. That is not how he described it at parties. At parties he said, home energy audits, and watched people's eyes go somewhere else, and he had made peace with that a long time ago. But it is the accurate description. A man calls him because his heating bill in Wynne Creek, Michigan has gone insane, and Wes comes out with a van full of equipment and does something that most homeowners find faintly unsettling. He seals the front door with a red nylon shroud, mounts a calibrated fan in it, and depressurizes the entire house. Everything the house has been hiding then announces itself. Air comes screaming in through gaps you cannot see, and Wes walks the rooms with an infrared camera, and on the little screen the leaks show up as cold blue rivers running down the inside of a wall that looks, to the naked eye, like a perfectly ordinary wall. He had been doing it for 11 years. He was 39. He'd come up through insulation crews and then a 2-year building science certification he'd paid for himself while working nights, and he had a mentor named Beau Deschamps, 60, who had taught him the thing he repeated most often, which was, the house is not lying to you on purpose. It's just telling you the truth about a different house than the one on the paperwork. He was married to Renata. He had a daughter named Sunny who was 7 and who had, at 4, announced that she intended to be either a paleontologist or the person who names the paint colors, and who had not moved off that position since. And on every other Saturday for 6 years, he had loaded a covered dish into the back of his truck and driven 11 minutes across Wynne Creek to his sister-in-law's house on Ledwidge Road for the Bexley family dinner. You have to understand the Bexleys to understand how this went on as long as it did. They were a big, loud, physically affectionate family that took up more space in a room than the number of them justified. Renata was one of 3. Her older sister Doreen had married a man named Kirk Hoyt, and together they owned the Ledwidge Road house, which was the family house, not because anyone had grown up in it, but because Doreen had decided in about 2016 that it would be, and Doreen was the kind of person whose decisions became facts by a process nobody could quite retrace afterward. Their mother was Maribeth Bexley, 63, who had a laugh you could hear from the driveway, and who ran the family the way a good manager runs a restaurant, by being everywhere, remembering everything about you, and never once letting you see the books. Kirk Hoyt was 44 and had a contracting license and a truck with his name on it, and a way of standing in a doorway with his arms crossed that Wes had disliked from the first month, and had never once been able to justify disliking. Kirk had done the Ledwidge Road renovation himself, in 2022. He talked about it a lot. He'd taken what he called a tired old center hall colonial and opened up the back, and everybody agreed it was beautiful. Wes had met Renata Bexley in 2017, in the parking lot of a hardware store in Wynne Creek, when her car battery had died, and she had already popped the hood and already had the jumper cables out and was, when he offered, about 4 seconds from not needing him. He has always said that was the whole relationship in one image, and that he should have paid closer attention to how much she liked being the one who handled things. They married in 2019. The Bexleys absorbed him the way that family absorbed everybody. Completely, immediately, and with a kind of cheerful violence. Within 8 months he had helped Kirk pour a patio, been taught a card game whose rules changed depending on who was losing, and been told by Maribeth, in front of 14 people, that he was the first man Renata had brought around who had a trade instead of a personality. He liked them. That is the uncomfortable thing he has to say every time he tells this. He liked the noise and the food, and the way nobody in that family ever let a silence sit for more than a second. He had grown up in Saginaw with a father who left when he was 9, and a mother who worked 2 jobs and a house where the phone ringing was usually bad news, and the Bexleys were the loudest and warmest room he had ever been allowed into. You do not audit a room you are grateful to be in. The Bexley money story was one everybody in that family knew, and nobody had ever laid out end to end. Tilly's husband, Ward Bexley, had died in 1996, and Tilly had gone on teaching chemistry for another 11 years after that, because she liked it. She had bought the small house on Verrill Street outright in 2001, with the insurance money and her own savings, and she had lived in it alone for 18 years. She was not rich. That matters, and it is the part people get wrong when they hear this story. She had a teacher's pension of about $3,100 a month, Social Security on top of that, a paid-off house, and roughly $90,000 in savings. She was, in the way that a lot of 80-year-old American women are, quietly, unspectacularly solvent, which is to say, she was worth almost exactly as much as it takes to make a certain kind of person start doing arithmetic about you. And in 2016, when Doreen and Kirk had found the Ledwidge Road house and been $41,000 short on the down payment, Tilly had written the check without being asked twice. Wes had heard that story at least a dozen times, always told by Doreen, always framed as generosity. Grandma made this house happen. And he had never once heard anybody describe what Tilly got in return, because the answer was nothing. Not a lien, not a note, not an interest. $41,000 into a house with her granddaughter's name on the deed and not hers. The first time Wes ever thought a bad thought about that family was at a barbecue in 2021, when Kirk had described the down payment as family investment, and Tilly, who was standing right there with a paper plate, had said mildly, "That's a nice word for it," and the whole yard had laughed, and Wes had watched Doreen's jaw move. He forgot about it for 4 years. And then there was Tilly. Ottilie Bexley was Maribeth's mother, Renata's grandmother, Sonny's great-grandmother, and she was 84 years old. Wes had met her maybe 9 times, all of them in the first 3 years of his marriage. She was small and dry and funny. She had taught high school chemistry for 31 years, and she had once told Wes, at a Christmas, that she had liked him immediately because he had asked her a question and then actually waited for the answer. Around the middle of 2023, Tilly stopped coming to dinners. The explanation was reasonable, and it arrived early, and it never changed. She'd had a fall. Her memory was going. She was in a place up in Gaylord, a nice place, a small place. They'd looked at 11 of them. And no, visits weren't a good idea right now, because they agitated her. And the staff had been very clear about that, and honestly it was hard enough on Maribeth as it was. That is a good lie. It is a good lie because every part of it is a thing that happens to real families every single day, and because it makes anyone who pushes on it into a person who is upsetting a grieving daughter. Wes accepted it. He asked about her maybe every 3rd month, got the same 3 sentences, and stopped asking. He is not proud of that, and he has said so publicly since, in a room with cameras in it, which we will get to. 2.5 years is a long time to not notice something. And I want to walk you through how it actually goes, because how did nobody see it is the wrong question, and it is the question everybody asks. It goes like this. In the autumn of 2023, Wes noticed that the guest bathroom at Ledwidge Road had a grab bar in it. He noticed it because he installs things for a living, and because it was mounted well, into blocking, by somebody who knew what he was doing. He thought, Kirk's getting ahead of it. Good for him. He did not think, who is that for? In the spring of 2024, Sonny came home from a dinner with a book. It was a hardcover of The Hobbit. Elderly, with a cracked spine and a name written inside the front cover in fountain pen. Renata said, "Where'd you get that?" And Sonny said, "Auntie Doreen said I could take it." And that was the end of the conversation. And the name inside the front cover was O. Bexley, 1974. And neither parent opened it. In the summer of 2024, at a birthday party, Maribeth mentioned that the facility in Gaylord had gone up on their rates again, and a cousin asked what they were paying now, and Maribeth said a number, just under 9, and everybody made a face about it. Later, in the car, Renata said, 9,000 a month. God. And Wes said something about how it never ends. Neither of them ever asked to see a statement, because who asks a grieving woman to see a statement? In the winter of 2024, Wes went to use the powder room off that back hallway and found it locked, and Doreen appeared behind him within about 4 seconds and said the septic was acting up and to use the one upstairs. He used the one upstairs. He thought about it for perhaps 6 seconds total, and what he thought was, I should offer to look at that for them. He never offered. He was busy. It was December. That is what 2.5 years looks like. It is not a wall of red flags. It is 9 or 10 small things spaced months apart, each of which has a completely reasonable explanation, delivered by people you love, in a house where you are handed a drink at the door. And it is a kid, changing. Sonny had started, somewhere in that stretch, doing a thing at the start of every other Saturday where she asked what they were bringing. Not whether they were going, what they were bringing. She'd get specific about it. Once she asked whether they could bring the soft cookies instead of the crunchy ones, and when Renata asked why, she said, the crunchy ones are hard for some people. And Renata told Wes about it that night, as a cute thing their daughter had said. She had started saving things. Small things, a pine cone, a smooth stone from the driveway, a page torn out of a coloring book, into a shoebox in her closet, and taking the shoebox to dinner in her backpack. And in April of 2025, a month before the porch, Sonny had asked her mother a question at bedtime that Renata later wrote down on page 4 of 19. If somebody's supposed to be somewhere else, but they're not, is that a lie, or is it just a mistake? Renata had said, "Where'd that come from, bug?" And Sonny had said, "School." The Ledwidge Roadhouse had a front door with a leaded glass sidelight and a brass bell that Kirk had installed himself, and every time you pressed it, it made a two-tone chime that Wes had heard several hundred times. On the 18th of May, at 6:10 in the evening, his daughter took hold of 2 of his fingers on the top porch step and pulled him back half a pace. "Dad, don't ring it." He looked down at her. She had a plastic container of blondies in her free hand, because that was her job. She was not being funny. Her face was doing something he had never seen it do. "We have to go around back," she said. "That's where we go." And here is the part Wes has spent a great deal of time trying to explain to people. He did not say, "What do you mean?" He did not laugh. He did not ask her a question at all. Some part of his brain that had spent 11 years listening to buildings tell him things registered the specific flatness in his kid's voice, the tone of somebody reciting a procedure, and he heard himself say, "Okay." He said, "Okay, show me." They went down off the porch and along the north side of the house, past the hose reel and the 2 garbage bins and the AC condenser, and Sonny walked in front of him the whole way with the completely unremarkable body language of a person who has walked that route many, many times before. That is the detail that did it, not the sentence, the walking. She knew where the flagstone was loose. She stepped over it without looking down. He had been coming to that house for 6 years, and he had never once been down that side of it. They came around into the back, and there was the deck Kirk had built, and the big glass slider, and everybody inside with their drinks, and Doreen saw them through the glass, and her face did a thing in the half-second before it turned into a smile. Wes remembers 3 things about the next 90 seconds. He remembers Doreen sliding the door open and saying, "There you are," in a voice that was a quarter tone too high. He remembers his wife looking at their daughter and then very quickly not looking at her. And he remembers that Sonny walked straight past all of the adults, put the blondies on the counter without being told, and went directly down the short hallway toward the back of the house, the way you go when you have somewhere to be. Doreen said, "Sonny, sweetheart, we're eating in 10. And Sonny said, "I know," and kept going. Nobody in that kitchen thought that was strange. Wes watched 11 adults not think it was strange, and that was the moment the floor tilted. He didn't do anything that night. I want to be honest about that, because there's a version of this story where the hero kicks a door, and it is a much less interesting version, and it also gets his daughter taken away from him. Wes Tolliver sat through that dinner. He ate a piece of chicken he does not remember. He laughed at Kirk's story about a job in Petoskey. And he watched. What he watched was traffic. Over about 2 hours, 4 different people went down that back hallway. Maribeth twice, Doreen once, a cousin named Peg once, and every single one of them was carrying something in, and every single one of them came back with their hands empty or with a plate. Nobody announced it. Nobody said, "I'll just take this back to anything." It happened in the gaps of the conversation, the way a thing happens when it has been happening for a very long time. At one point, Kirk stood up, went and stood in the mouth of that hallway with a beer in his hand, said something Wes couldn't hear, and came back. And Sunny stayed back there for 50 minutes, and then came out and sat down and ate her dinner like a normal child. And when Wes asked her in the truck on the way home what she'd been doing, she said, "Just hanging out." He said, "With who, bug?" And his 7-year-old, who could not tell a lie to save her life, looked out the window and said, "Nobody. There's nobody back there." Which is a sentence a child does not produce on her own. He tried to talk to his wife about it on the Tuesday. He did it badly, which he knew even while he was doing it. He said, "In the kitchen, with the dishwasher running, does it seem weird to you that Sunny goes in the back?" And Renata, who was scraping a pan, said, "The Cora thing?" Wes said, "The what?" And his wife told him, in the flat, slightly impatient voice of somebody explaining a thing she believes she has explained before, that there was a neighbor lady, Cora, a friend of Doreen's, older, kept to herself, who sat in the back room some Saturdays, and that Sunny had latched onto her the way kids do, and that Doreen thought it was good for both of them. Wes said, "I've never met her." Renata said, "You've never met most of Doreen's friends," which was true, and then she said, "It's nice, Wes, let her have it." And there was an edge under it that he recognized as the edge she used when she was defending her family, and he backed off, because he had learned in 6 years that this was a wall you did not get over by pushing. He lay awake that night doing something he now describes as the worst 4 hours of thinking he has ever done, which was constructing, in enormous detail, the version where he was the problem, where he was a guy who didn't like his brother-in-law and was building a case out of a kid being weird about a doorbell. He got up at 4 in the morning and made coffee and stood in his own kitchen and asked himself the only question that has ever gotten him anywhere. What would I do if this were a house? And the answer arrived instantly, because it is the same answer every time. You don't argue with the homeowner about whether there's a leak. You don't take his word for it that the attic's fine. You go and you take a measurement, and then the measurement is not your opinion anymore. He drove to work at 5 and did a blower door test on a ranch house in Ostrander that morning, and found a $200 problem in 11 minutes, and the whole time his hands were shaking. Beau Deschamps noticed. Beau had noticed everything for 60 years. He handed Wes a coffee at the tailgate and said, "You're somewhere else." Wes said, "Family stuff." And Beau, who had buried a wife and raised a son who did not call him, said, "Family stuff is the only stuff," and went back to coiling hose and left the door open, which is what a good mentor does. Wes Tolliver had been in perhaps 2,000 houses. That is not a figure of speech. He keeps job records, and when the lawyers eventually asked him, he pulled the number, and it was 2,141. And there is a thing that happens to a man who has been in 2,000 houses, which is that he stops being able to switch it off. He walks into a restaurant and clocks the pressure differential from the door. He sits at a friend's table and knows there's a return duct in the ceiling above him. So on the drive home on the 18th of May, with his daughter asleep in the back, he did the thing he does automatically, which is that he built the Ledwidge Roadhouse in his head. Center Hall Colonial. 2-story, roughly 44 feet across the front, 32 deep. Kirk had opened up the back in 2022, taken out the wall between kitchen and family room, put in the slider and the deck, and there was a hallway on the north side of the back of the house with a door at the end of it. Wes sat in his own driveway for 11 minutes with the engine off, running that plan, and could not make the numbers work. Because from the outside, the north back corner of that house is about 16 feet by 20. And from the inside, the pantry and the powder room and the utility closet that occupy that corner add up to maybe half of that. There was something on the order of 180 square feet in the northeast back corner of his sister-in-law's house that he could not account for. The next morning, a Sunday, he drove out to Ledwidge Road at 9 in the morning and parked one street over on Trask and walked down the block with a cup of gas station coffee like a man out for a walk, which he had literally never done in his life. He counted windows. From the street and from the alley behind, the back northeast corner of the house showed 2 windows on the ground floor. Both had been fitted with white interior blinds, closed. There was an old aluminum storm window on the outside of one of them, which was strange because Kirk had replaced every window in that house in 2022 and had complained about the cost of it at 4 consecutive family dinners. From the inside, and Wes had stood in that kitchen 100 times, you could see exactly 1 window in that corner, in the pantry. 1 window from inside, 2 from outside. He went home and he did not tell his wife. Then he did the only genuinely reckless thing in this entire story. The following Wednesday, Renata took Sonny to a swim lesson. Wes drove out to Ledwidge Road in the middle of the afternoon, when he knew Kirk was on a job in Alpena, and Doreen worked till 5, and he parked on Trask again, and he walked down the alley behind the house with a thermal camera in his jacket pocket. He did not go onto the property. He has been very clear about that, and so has every attorney who has ever discussed it. He stood in a public alley, 40 feet back from the rear property line, and he raised a FLIR camera and took 11 photographs of the back of a house. An infrared image of a house in late May in Michigan is mostly boring. What it shows you is where heat is moving. 9 of those photographs were boring. 2 of them showed a rectangle of ceiling above the northeast back corner glowing about 4 degrees warmer than the ceiling above the pantry beside it, in a pattern Wes had seen several hundred times in his career and could have identified in his sleep. It was the signature of an occupied room, a room with a body in it and a small heat source, a space heater or a lamp, running against an exterior wall with almost no insulation behind it. He stood in that alley for a long time. Then he went home and sat in his truck in his own driveway again, and thought about all the reasons he could be wrong, and made a list of them, out loud, because that is what Bo had taught him. Say the innocent explanation out loud, and if it survives being said, take it seriously. A freezer, a grow operation, a server, a dog crate with a heat lamp, a dehumidifier, a kid's playroom. None of them survived, because none of them explain why a 7-year-old walks in through the back door and spends 50 minutes down that hallway and then says there's nobody back there. He called Beau Deschamps that night and told him the whole thing. Beau was quiet for a while. Then he said something Wes has repeated in about 9 interviews since. "Kid, you do not have a building problem. You have got to stop treating this like a building problem." Wes said, "What do I have?" And Beau said, "You have got a person in a room. Go find out who's cashing her checks." There is a thing that happens in Wes's trade that he had explained to homeowners about 400 times, and it took him until that week to hear himself saying it. When a house has a hidden problem, a wet wall, a dead crawl space, a chimney that has been quietly venting into a bedroom for 9 years, the house does not hide it. The house cannot hide anything. It is a physical object obeying physics. What hides it is the finish. The drywall, the paint, the trim, the tidy room somebody built over the top of it. The finish is the only liar in the building. And the thing that gets people killed, in his trade, is that a beautiful finish reads as competence. A homeowner looks at a gorgeous renovated back of a house and concludes that the person who built it knew what he was doing, and the exact opposite is frequently true. Because a man who is covering something up has every reason to make the cover look expensive. Kirk Hoyt's renovation was beautiful. Everybody said so. Wes had said so. He also, sitting in his truck that Wednesday with the thermal images still on the camera, remembered something he had genuinely never thought about once in 3 years. There had been no dumpster. You cannot take out a wall between a kitchen and a family room, close off 170 square feet, run new electrical and put in a slider, and not generate about 4 tons of debris. Wes had been to that house 11 times during the 2022 renovation. He had walked past that driveway all summer. There had never been a dumpster in it. Kirk had hauled every scrap of that job away himself, in his own truck, at night, over 4 months, which is a thing that costs a contractor an enormous amount of time and which he does for exactly one reason. Because a dumpster is a public record of what came out of a house, sitting at the curb where the neighbors and the township can see it. Wes wrote that down. It ended up on page 2 of a 14-page statement. Ottilie Bexley had been a chemistry teacher at Wynne Creek Central for 31 years, and a Michigan public school teacher who retires with 31 years in has a pension. She also had Social Security, and she had sold a house in 2019. Wes did not have access to any of that, and he did not try to get it, which turned out to matter enormously later. What he had access to was the county. Property records are public, court filings are public, and on a Thursday night in late May, at his own kitchen table, with a beer he did not drink, Wes Tolliver looked up the Ledwidge Road parcel and found 3 things. The first was that the house had been purchased in 2016 for $241,000, and that the down payment on it, recorded in the file as a gift of equity from a family member, had come from Ottilie Bexley. The second was that in October of 2022, 4 months after Kirk's renovation, a quitclaim deed had been recorded transferring a partial interest in a different property, a small house on Verrill Street, Tilly's own house, the one everyone had been told was sold in 2019, from Ottilie Bexley to Doreen Bexley Hoyt. It had not been sold in 2019. It had been rented out since 2019, to tenants, who were paying. And the third was a probate court filing from March of 2023 that took Wes about 40 minutes and 2 phone calls to a paralegal to understand, and that he understood, when he finally did, all at once and with his hands going cold. A petition for guardianship and conservatorship over Ottilie Bexley, granted, uncontested, with Doreen Bexley Hoyt named as both guardian of the person and conservator of the estate. Uncontested, because the only people who would have contested it were her granddaughters, and one of them had filed it, and the other one had been told her grandmother was in a nice place up in Gaylord. A conservator controls the money. A guardian controls the person, where she lives, who sees her, what care she gets. In March of 2023, a court in Wynne Creek had handed Doreen Bexley Hoyt complete legal authority over an 84-year-old woman, and had done it in a hearing that took, according to the docket, 19 minutes. Now, everything up to this point Wes did on his own, in the dark, in about 11 days. Everything after this point he did with other people, and that is the entire reason it worked. And if there is one thing I would want you to take out of this story, it is that difference. Because here is what he did not do. He did not confront Doreen. He did not tell his wife. He did not post anything. He did not go back to that house. He did not, and this is the one that would have been most human, sit his 7-year-old down and interrogate her about what was behind that door, which would have contaminated the only clean witness in the entire case, and would have been the first thing a defense attorney went after. What he did on the 3rd of June was call Adult Protective Services in the county seat and ask, in a voice he says was extremely unsteady, to speak to an investigator. He got a man named Devin Achebe, who had been doing that job for 9 years, and who listened to a home energy auditor describe an infrared photograph of a ceiling for 4 uninterrupted minutes without once interrupting. Then Achebe said, "Mr. Tolliver, can you send me those images with their timestamps and metadata intact, and can you write down, tonight, before you sleep, everything your daughter said and did, in her words, not yours?" Wes said yes. And Achebe said one more thing, which Wes says he thinks about constantly. "I want to tell you now so you're ready. If I go out there and knock, and there's nothing, you will have done the right thing. And if I go out there and knock, and there is something, this becomes the worst year of your family's life. There is no version of this where you get to be comfortable. The first attempt failed." That is the part these stories usually skip, and it is the part that matters most. So I am going to give it to you straight. Devin Achebe made an unannounced visit to the Ledwidge Road house on the 9th of June at 2 in the afternoon. Doreen Bexley Hoyt met him at the front door, She was pleasant, she was articulate, she produced the guardianship order within about 90 seconds, and she told him that her grandmother was a resident at a memory care facility in Gaylord and offered to provide the name. She did not let him in. She did not have to. An APS investigator cannot enter a private home over the owner's objection, and the person he was there to see was, according to a valid court order in that man's hands, 90 miles north. Achebe left. He called the facility in Gaylord. Ottilie Bexley had been a resident there for 11 days in April of 2023, before being discharged to the care of her guardian. That took him a week to establish, because facilities are careful with information, and by the time he had it, Wes had received a phone call. Maribeth Bexley called her daughter's husband at 8:40 at night, and she did not scream. That is what Wes remembers. She was warm. She was sad. She said that somebody had made a report about the family, and that she knew it hadn't been him, and that if it had been him, she knew it would have come from love, and that she just wanted him to know that they had all been carrying something very heavy for a very long time, and that when he was ready, he could just call and ask, and they'd tell him everything. Then she said, "Renata's had such a hard time with Grandma. Don't make her carry yours too." That is a masterpiece. There is a threat in there, an appeal, an accusation, and an exit, in 4 sentences, and none of them would sound like anything on a recording. The next Saturday there was no family dinner. There was never a family dinner at Ledwidge Road again. What followed was 6 weeks of the most sophisticated pressure Wes Tolliver has ever been put under, and almost none of it was hostile. That is the part people do not expect. Nobody threatened him. Nobody came to his house at night. What happened instead was that a warm, coordinated, extremely competent family began, gently and relentlessly, to make him the problem. It started in the group chat, 22 people, named Bexley Central, which Wes had been in since 2019. Nobody said a word about APS. What happened was that a photograph went up of a dinner at Ledwidge Road on the 21st of June, and Wes and Renata and Sonny were not in it, and nobody mentioned that either. Then a cousin posted about how nice it was that everybody who could make it made it. Then, 2 days later, Maribeth posted a long paragraph about how hard it is when families go through things, and how she was praying for everybody, with no names in it at all. Kirk Hoyt turned up at one of Wes's job sites on the 24th. He did not park. He rolled down the window of his truck at the curb of a house in Ostrander, where Wes was running a blower door, and he said, pleasantly, "Hey, you doing okay, man?" And when Wes said he was fine, Kirk said, "You know, if you ever need work, I got stuff. Slow season's rough," and he drove off. That is a threat. It is entirely deniable, and it is unmistakably a threat. And what it said was, "I know exactly how your money works." Duran took Renata to lunch. She cried. She was extremely good at it. Renata has testified about this, and it is hard to read. And she told her sister that the family was being investigated because of an anonymous report, and that she thought it might have come from a neighbor with a grudge, and that the stress was affecting her health, and that she just needed Renata not to believe the worst about her. And then she said, "Whatever you hear, remember that I'm the one who's been carrying Grandma, alone, for 2 years, while everybody else got to just be sad about it." Renata came home and did not speak for an hour, and then said to her husband, "I need you to tell me you're sure." And Wes, and this is the answer that saved his marriage, said, "I'm not sure. That's the whole point. I'm not sure, and neither are they. And the only way anybody gets sure is if somebody with a badge opens that door. If I'm wrong, I will apologize to every single one of them in that kitchen, in front of everybody, and I will mean it." The last piece was the one that nearly worked. On the 2nd of July, Maribeth Bexley called Renata and offered to drive her up to Gaylord to see Grandma. She said she'd been thinking about it, and that maybe the staff had been overcautious, and that it might do everybody good. She proposed the following Saturday. She was warm about it. She sounded relieved. Renata said yes. And Wes, that night, standing in their bedroom, understood something in about 4 seconds that took him a long time to be able to say out loud, that there was no trip to Gaylord. That the offer was the point. That an offer to visit, extended generously, and then postponed once for a perfectly good reason, and then postponed again, buys a family 6 more weeks, and makes the person who insisted look insane. He called Devon Achebe at 10:40 at night and told him about the offer. Achebe was quiet, and then he said, "Mr. Tolliver, do not let her cancel that trip. Let them cancel it." They canceled it on the Thursday. Maribeth had a thing with her back. Renata Tolliver knew. I have gone back and forth on how to tell you this part, and I have landed on, not the way Wes found out, which was slow and awful, but plainly. She did not know everything. She did not know about the room. She believed, and 2 forensic interviews and a great deal of testimony support this, that her grandmother was in a facility, and that her sister was handling it, and that the reason the family didn't visit was the reason the family had always said. But she knew about Sonny. She had known for about 2 years that when they came to Ledwidge Road, her daughter went in the back door and spent the dinner in the back of the house, because Doreen had told her that Sonny had a thing going with a neighbor lady who sat in the back room sometimes, a friend of the family, and that it was sweet, and that Sonny liked having a grown-up who was all hers. That is what she had been told. That is what she had accepted. And that is what she had helped enforce. Because on at least 3 occasions Renata had been the one to say to her daughter, in the car, "Remember, we go around." She had helped teach her child the rule. When Wes finally laid it out for her on the 22nd of June, the windows, the thermal images, the guardianship, the 11 days in Gaylord, his wife made a sound he had never heard a human being make, and then went into their bathroom and was sick. And then she did the thing that decided the whole case. She got up off the floor, washed her face, and said, "Get me a piece of paper. I'm going to write down every single thing I was ever told about my grandmother, and who told me, and when." 19 pages, 2.5 years of statements, with dates, in her own handwriting, by a woman who had a photographic memory for conversations, and a sister who had been lying to her since 2023. The warrant came on the 8th of July. And it came because of Rook. Rook Hoyt was 16. He was Doreen and Kirk's son. He had a learner's permit and a bad attitude and a habit of not being where anyone thought he was. And on the 5th of July, at a gas station on Route 32, he found Wes Tolliver at a pump and stood there with his hands in his pockets for a while, and then said, "Is somebody actually doing something, or is this just going to be a thing again?" Wes said, very carefully, that somebody was. And Rook Hoyt took out his phone and showed his uncle a photograph he had taken on the 29th of December 2024 at 4 in the afternoon, of a door in a back hallway with a Yale keypad deadbolt mounted on it. Mounted, as anyone who has ever installed a lock can tell you in half a second, with the keypad on the hallway side. The side you lock from. Locks are directional. That is the whole thing. A lock installed backwards is not a lock. It is a cage, and it takes 1 photograph to prove it. Rook had 11 photographs and 2 videos going back 19 months, and he had never shown them to anybody, because he was 14 when he took the first one, and he had asked his mother about the door once, and had been grounded for 6 weeks. Detective Aurelia Nwosu executed a search warrant at 1140 Ledwidge Road at 7 in the morning on the 8th of July. The door at the end of the north hallway was, from the kitchen side, a white 6-panel door with a keypad deadbolt and a laundry hamper in front of it. Behind it was a short passage that had been the back of the original mudroom, and then a second door, and behind that was a room of about 170 square feet with 2 windows, one of which had been permanently screwed shut and covered with a sheet of white painted plywood on the inside, which is why you could only see 1 window from the interior. In the room there was a hospital bed, a commode, a small refrigerator, a space heater, a television on a stand with no remote, a chair, and 1,004 books, which had been Tilly's, moved from Verrill Street in 2022, and stacked along the walls in columns because there were no shelves. And in the chair, dressed, with her hair done, because it was 7 in the morning and she had already been up for 2 hours, was Ottilie Bexley, 84. She was not demented. She had never been demented. 2 independent geriatric evaluations, one of them by Dr. Josef Lindquist, put her cognition in the normal range for her age. She was severely deconditioned, 41 pounds underweight, with untreated cataracts, a fractured wrist that had healed wrong in 2023, and a vitamin D level that Lindquist described in his report as consistent with a person who has not been outdoors in over 2 years. She had been in that room for 2 years and 8 months. The first thing she said to Detective Nwosu, and Nwosu testified to it twice, was, "Is Sunny all right? Nobody's angry with her, are they?" Detective Nwosu has described the first 4 minutes in that room in 3 separate proceedings, and the details do not change. She said the room was clean. That is the thing that stops people. It was not a filth case. There were no rats and no soiled bedding, and the smell was, in her words, old paper and Vicks. Somebody had been bringing in food and taking out a commode bucket for 2 years and 8 months. The lie was not neglect in the way people picture neglect. She said the television had no remote and was tuned to a channel that had gone off the air in 2024, so the screen was showing color bars, and it had been showing color bars for an unknown number of months, and when the officers came in, Tilly apologized to them for the noise. She said the books were in columns 11 high along 3 walls, and that they were in alphabetical order by author, and that a woman who had been kept in a room without shelves for 32 months had built herself a library on the floor and maintained it. And she said that Ottilie Bexley, who had been unlawfully imprisoned in the back of her own granddaughter's house since November of 2022, stood up out of that chair without being asked, put her hand out, and said, "You'll want to see the wrist. It didn't set right. That'll be the one they can't explain." 31 years of teaching high school chemistry. She had been building the case in her head the entire time. Dr. Josef Lindquist admitted her that afternoon. He kept her 9 days. In the first 72 hours, she had the fractured and malunited left wrist x-rayed, a hemoglobin of 9.1, a vitamin D level of 11, cataracts in both eyes rated as visually significant, and a set of pressure marks on the backs of her calves consistent with a person who had spent most of 2 years in one chair. The report also recorded, under cognition, fully oriented, Mocha 2730. Patient corrected the examiner's arithmetic. What she wanted, in the first 4 days, in order, was a toothbrush of her own choosing, the newspaper, to know whether the Verrill Street tenants were all right, and to see Sunny. The hospital would not let a 7-year-old onto that floor, so on the 4th day, Wes Tolliver held his daughter up outside a ground floor window in a parking lot in the rain, and an 84-year-old woman in a hospital gown stood at the glass with a nurse holding her elbow and put her hand flat against it. Sunny put hers on the other side. Neither of them said anything, because there was a window in the way. They just stood there, and after a while Sunny said, into her father's neck, "See, she's real. The rest of it came apart over 14 months, and I will give you the shape of it." The money was the motive, and it was not glamorous. Between March 2023 and July 2025, Doreen Bexley Hoyt, as conservator, received and controlled Ottilie Bexley's teacher's pension, her social security, the rental income from the Verrill Street house that the family had been told was sold, and the proceeds of a reverse mortgage taken out against Verrill Street in 2024. The total that passed through the conservatorship account was $488,000. The total the court's later accounting could match to Tilly's actual care was under $9,000. The Ledwidge Road renovation in 2022, Kirk's beautiful open back, had cost $81,000, and it had done 2 things. It had opened up the family side of the house, and it had closed off the northeast corner, and Kirk Hoyt had pulled a permit for exactly none of it. Maribeth Bexley had not signed a single document. Maribeth Bexley had done the entire social architecture, the story about Gaylord, the story about the agitation, the discouraging of visits, the phone calls to anybody who asked twice, for 2.5 years, to her own mother. Doreen Bexley Hoyt was convicted on 11 counts, including embezzlement by a fiduciary, vulnerable adult abuse in the 1st degree, and unlawful imprisonment. She got 22 to 40 years. Kirk Hoyt took a plea and testified. 14 years, and a permanent revocation of his builder's license, which the judge noted was the only part of the sentence he visibly reacted to. Maribeth Bexley went to trial on the theory that she had never touched the money and had never locked a door, and the jury took 4 hours. Vulnerable adult abuse and conspiracy. 11 years, she is 71. 4 other adults who had eaten dinner in that house pled to failure to report or lesser counts. A cousin named Peg Vandersloot, who had carried a plate down that hallway an estimated 400 times, got probation and a felony record, and, according to everyone who was there, cried harder at her sentencing than anyone else in the case. The trial of Maribeth Bexley took 9 days, and the reason it is worth 2 minutes of your time is that it is the clearest picture I have ever seen of how a person can do the most damage in a room while touching nothing. Her defense was, technically, correct. She had never signed a conservatorship document. She had never been on the account. She had never installed a lock, never hauled a load of drywall at midnight, never pulled a permit she should have pulled. Her attorney said the word paperwork 40-some times and pointed out, accurately, that every single financial instrument in the case bore her daughter's signature. The prosecution called 11 witnesses and did not spend much time on money at all. They called a cousin who testified that when she had asked, in 2023, whether she could send Tilly a card, Maribeth had told her the facility didn't allow outside mail because of a norovirus policy. They called a former colleague of Tilly's from the high school, a retired physics teacher named Aldous Wren, who testified that he had driven to Gaylord twice, 90 miles each way, with a tin of shortbread, and had been told at the desk both times that there was no resident by that name, and had then called Maribeth, who had told him he must have gone to the wrong place, and had given him the name of a different facility, in Grayling, which does not exist. They called Wes Tolliver, who was on the stand for 6 hours over 2 days, and who read from her own 19 pages, and who was asked by the defense why a woman with such an excellent memory had never once picked up a phone, and who said, "Because she was my mother, and I believed her, and I will be answering that question for the rest of my life." And they called Rook Hoyt, 16, who had to be sworn in twice because the first time his voice did not come out. Rook testified for 50 minutes about 11 photographs. The defense's strategy with him was gentle. You were 14, you were confused, you didn't really know what you were looking at, and it worked fine for about 40 of those minutes. Then the attorney asked him why, if he had really believed somebody was locked in that room, he had never told an adult. And Rook Hoyt said, "I did. I told my grandma." The jury was out 4 hours. Wes has said that the thing he remembers about the verdict is not the verdict. It is that when it came in, 3 rows behind him, a woman he had never met made a small noise, and it turned out to be a retired physics teacher's wife. And Tilly Bexley went home. Not to Verrill Street, which took 19 months to unwind. She went to Wes and Renata's, to the room that had been the office, for 11 weeks, and then into a small apartment 9 minutes away, that Wes drove her to look at 4 times before she agreed to it. The money took longer to unwind than the people did. The Verrill Street house had a reverse mortgage on it that had been taken out in 2024 by a conservator with valid court authority, which meant the lender had done nothing wrong and was owed $109,000 by an 84-year-old woman who had never seen a dollar of it. It took Solomon Vickery, the attorney Wes hired with a home equity line against his own house, which is a sentence I want you to sit with for a second, 19 months and a restitution order to get that unwound. There were tenants in that house who had been paying rent into an account they had every reason to think was legitimate, and who were, by the end, more frightened than anybody. And Tilly's first instruction to Vickery was that nobody was to be evicted over any of it. Nobody was. Restitution came to $488,000 on paper. The realistic recovery was about $210,000, most of it out of the forced sale of the Ledwidge Road house, which sold in the spring of 2027 to a young couple who, as far as anyone knows, have never been told. And Renata. I said earlier that her 19 pages decided the case, and they did. What I did not say is what they cost her. She testified against her mother and her sister. She has one surviving relationship out of that entire family, and it is with a 16-year-old boy who took photographs, and she drives him to community college twice a week now because his mother is in prison and his father is in prison, and the state of Michigan does not provide transport for that. She and Wes went to counseling for 2 years. There was a stretch in 2026 where they lived apart for 5 months, and Wes has been open about that, because he says the version where the marriage survives cleanly is a lie that makes other people in the same position feel like failures. They are together. It took work that neither of them enjoys describing. And the last thing, which I think is the truest thing in the whole file. Renata Tolliver has never once, in any interview or any proceeding, allowed anyone to call her a victim of her family. She says the accurate word is participant. She says she taught her own daughter to walk around the back of that house 3 times with her own mouth, and that she is not going to be let off it, and that she says it out loud so that other people who have been handed a comfortable sentence about a relative they no longer see might hear it and go and knock on a door. She is 87 now. She had her cataracts done in the spring of 2026 and told the surgeon it was the best money anyone had ever spent on her. She walks with a rollator. She reads roughly a book every 2 days, and every Wednesday she is picked up from that apartment by a girl who is now 10 years old and who does not, as it turns out, want to name paint colors anymore. Sunny Tolliver wants to be a lawyer. She has been extremely clear about it since she was 8. Her father asked her once, gently, a long time afterward, what she had actually thought was happening back there for those 2 years. And Sunny said, "I thought she was a secret. I thought if I told, she'd be in trouble." And then she said the thing that gets me every time I read the transcript. "I thought going around the back was how I was helping." Here's what I keep landing on. Wes Tolliver did not save that woman with a thermal camera. He wants people to stop saying that. The camera confirmed a thing he already believed, and the reason he already believed it is that he did something on a porch step that costs nothing and that almost nobody does. His daughter said a strange sentence, and instead of explaining it away, he said, "Okay, show me." That's it. That's the hinge the whole thing turns on. A 7-year-old handed him a piece of information that did not fit, and he did not smooth it out. Every adult in that story had been handed pieces that did not fit. A grandmother who was suddenly unvisitable. A house that got smaller inside than it looked outside. A kid who disappeared for 50 minutes every other Saturday. And every one of them found a comfortable sentence to put over the top of it. So the instruction I'd give you is small, and it is annoyingly literal. The next time you are in a house you visit often, your in-laws, your friends, wherever, go outside and count the windows. Then go inside and count them again. It takes 90 seconds and you will feel ridiculous doing it. And 99 times out of 100, the numbers will match. And you will have learned nothing except that you were right to trust these people. And if you ever have a child tell you not to ring a doorbell, do not ask her why. Not right away. Say okay, and let her show you. And watch her feet, because a kid who is making something up walks like she's making it up, and a kid who has walked a route 200 times steps over the loose flagstone without looking down. Ottilie Bexley spent 2 years and 8 months 40 feet from a dinner table, and the only person in that house who ever went to sit with her was 7 years old and had been told it was a secret. Go count the windows. I'm Nathan. Thanks for staying to the end of this one.